values of our founding fathers of America. It'll come up pretty soon. All right, I won't worry about that. And we often hear about our political persons and leaders talking about family values. Probably heard that term. And also human rights we've heard lately, and especially in international news. And the question I asked then, what is our values and human rights based on? It's a question to ponder here. And I submit to you that our country was founded on biblical values and individual human rights. And the Bible is basically the source of our values and rights, in that it says we are created in God's image, and each of us, you and you, are precious in God's sight. And that's wonderful that we are considered precious, but that's from the Bible. So if you use the philosophy of humanism, materialism, or Marxism, any of those, basically there is no God, and there really is no basis for individual human rights. We're just like an animal then. And there is only value of rights for the masses, or whoever is in power. It's supposed to, the idea of that is for the benefit of common man, for the masses, but there's not really basis for individual human rights in that. We'll go back to our Declaration of Independence. It says we have certain inalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what is the source of those inalienable rights, I would ask you? And man is the source. Basically, man can take those rights away, and he has taken those rights away in some countries. So we also have in the Pledge of Allegiance, we just said, one nation under God. We said that. And on our currency, we have, it says, I have an example here, it says, in God we trust. And also, our first Congress had a chaplain, and still does have a chaplain, started with prayer. So I submit to you, our country was founded on biblical values. And our first Congress had, like I said, a chaplain. They still have that. So let's trace in briefly the history of laws and rights and where they came from. And if we go back in history, we find that the early history there were kings and dictators. And whatever the king said was law. He made the law. And if he wanted to kill off certain people he didn't like, he killed them off because he was the law. So how did that change? What changed that to the rule of law we have today? And there's a philosopher and theologian, Francis Schaeffer, that described how this really changed. And his view is that the Protestant Reformation was very important in this. And you might probably heard of Martin Luther. He started that. And also, he was from Germany. There was a Frenchman, Calvin, that was very active in this. And he had to escape to Scotland. He escaped to another country. I forgot the country. Switzerland, that was it. And then Knox, also, he was from Scotland, and he also had. But all of these men were advocates of the Protestant Reformation, and the basis of that is it says solo scriptura, or means Scripture is primary, or Scripture is the law. That was somewhat of a new concept. So then, all these men were outlawed and cast out. They were under death threats. Some of them escaped. Some of them were killed just for saying the Scripture is the law. And that was the start of that. And then it proceeded with another gentleman, Samuel Rutherford. He wrote a book called The Rex Lex. And that means the law is king. And the idea of that is that law should apply to everyone. It should be fair. There should be a system of justice. And that ended up shaping English common law and also our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, that book. And it was at that time, he was also outlawed by the kings. Because he said that the king should be under the law. But they didn't like that idea, as you would imagine. But anyhow, that book was very popular, and it was smuggled into England and to many other countries, and that became somewhat the basis of law that spread. And our founding fathers were aware of that book, the Lex Rex. And there was, out of this also, a painting, a mural was done called Justice Lists the Nations. This is done by Bennett, and this is actually found in the Swiss Supreme Court building. It's there, and it has the scales of justice with a lady holding it. You've probably seen that before, the idea of the scales of justice, and of the sword pointing at the Bible, and it says the law of God. So it points back to our true source of morals being the law of God. It used to be the Ten Commandments were in many of our court buildings, but now they've been removed. The idea of removing God from our society. So you see that God is somewhat the source of our founding fathers' values, and if we just rely on humanism, materialism, we sometimes don't have good results. I'll give you a couple examples of this, where the idea of the humanism, materialism has dominated, and God is removed from the equation. What happened in society? I'll give you two examples. One is the French Revolution. The French Revolution was the common man should triumph and overcome the kings. And he did, and they had a revolution that lasted a year, and in this there was mob violence, and they beheaded like 44,000 people were beheaded in the French Revolution over a year's time. There was struggle for power, and basically Napoleon took over as a dictator, and that was the end result of the French Revolution. Wasn't a really that good of immediate outcome. A second example is the Russian Revolution, and that was based on the same type of philosophy, Marxism, Leninism, and that has the idea again that the common man, it was sold on the common man should triumph, and he should be predominant. But how does that play out in practice? Basically, in that society, there was very little human rights. There was no freedom of the press. If anybody objected to the government, they were either killed off or put in a civilian death camp. So they outlawed the Bible, and any teaching of religion was outlawed. So that really has a pretty poor result. In fact, there was 66 million people killed in the Russian Revolution, more than was in World War II. So today we are very fortunate to have, in our country, we have separation of powers. We do have the rule of law. We can impeach the president. But we somewhat take this for granted, and what the original foundation of this was. Many societies don't have this. We have, for example, Libya today is ruled by other countries are ruled by a dictator. But today our original foundation of this, some of the court decisions of that are being eroded. Any basis of God is sort of being taken out in court decisions that reflect that our country is founded on belief in God. And humanism is growing. So our foundations are somewhat being removed slowly, and if, for example, if martial law was declared in the United States today, we probably would have suspension of a lot of our civil rights. So in summary, I'll give this one quote that Psalms 11:3, if the foundation of our values be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Mrs.